From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, please visit lean.org.
Hello, I'm Josh Howell, on the job at the Lean Enterprise Institute. You are listening to WLEI. Ron Kellner, the president and COO at the Dublin Company, joined me recently to talk about the lean transformation that's been underway at his company since 2008. He described how Dublin spent years learning lean deeply through the application of tools on the shop floor, changing how material and information flows through the operation, changing how value is created. In other words, changing the work. He then shared how they're building a lean business system on top of that, with human development at its core through structured problem solving that's happening throughout the company worldwide. Ron and a few of his colleagues will share even more at the upcoming Lean Summit 2020 in California on April 6th and 7th. For information about the summit and to register, you can visit us at lean.org. All right, here's my conversation with Ron.
So speaking of Dublin, and I guess speaking of you, Ron, maybe you could kind of briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the company, about Dublin.
Sure. Well, I've been with Dublin Company 18 years now and came to them from an aerospace manufacturing company, which was publicly traded. And prior to that, I was in the primary metals business. So think of a steel mill, except we were in the brass and copper production. Mm-hmm. And when I joined Dublin, it was extremely successful. It was a transition from retiring management to my joining the company. So it was not a case of a turnaround or anything like that. The company was growing and expanding like everyone else coming out of 1999 and 2000. They had a little bit of a setback. But we're seemingly back on track in the early 2000 period when I joined. Dublin Company, for those that don't know, we manufacture rotating unions and slip rings. And most people, I'm certain, don't know what a rotating union is.
I will count myself among those. Yes.
Joy, my family members as well. If you think about a manufacturing process where you're delivering any kind of media, whether that be air, gas, steam, water, coolant, in a rotational process, you can't hook the hose to it. Obviously, the hose would twist up. Dublin creates that coupling, that one side is stationary with the hose delivering whatever the media is to the rotating portion attached to the machine. Okay. And it's a small product that's critical to all production processes. So whether you're having wind turbines on the highway, controlling the pitch of the blades, cooling the rolls in a steel mill, or polishing the glass on your mobile device. It's used just about in every manufacturing process. So we're a small maintenance product used in virtually every industry. We have 5 manufacturing facilities. The U.S. Headquarters is just north of Chicago, as you mentioned, in Waukegan, Illinois. We have 2 plants in Europe, one just outside Frankfurt, and one in Bologna, Italy. And then in Asia, we have 1 manufacturing plant in Dalian, China, and a smaller manufacturing facility in Sao Paulo, Brazil, supporting a number of sales offices around the globe. So that's kind of Dublin in a thumbnail.
Okay, and you have responsibility for Dublin globally. So I guess you're traveling to these various sites around the world and supporting those teams in those locations.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So, here we are on the WLEI podcast, the official podcast of the Lean Enterprise Institute. So presumably, we are going to talk about lean thinking at Dublin. That's kind of the reason for our conversation.
I hope so.
So why don't you tell us about what's been happening with lean thinking at Dublin? Sort of when was the company introduced to it, or when were you introduced to it? What was the reason that it was an attractive sort of business mindset, business thinking way?
I'm happy to.
Cool.
I'm happy to, because it's kind of an interesting transition, because in many cases when you hear about companies with their lean journeys, and this includes Toyota, they're in desperate straits that force them to say we have to look at our business totally differently. And as I mentioned in my overview on Dublin Company, it was a very successful company, really from its founding moving forward in 1945 all the way up to when I joined. As privately held, we were very paternalistic. We took a great deal of pride in our long-term employees, and we have excellent employees, no question about that. But one of the things that was an observation to me was that we were very people dependent in our processes. In other words, if we had to make a critical part, oftentimes we would wait for whomever, Josh, Dwayne, Bob, Sally, Susie, to be there to do that production, because they were quote unquote the expert of that.
They know how to do it, nobody else did, and pretty dependent on that expertise.
And honestly, that was wonderful as the company grew to a certain size. When I joined, I had a little bit of background through the 80s, 90s on the whole quality systems. So, as the advent of the ISO certifications and the various automotive qualifications, I certainly saw the benefit of a quality system that linked the processes together more in line with how the customer saw it. But my early years with Dublin, 2002 to 2008, we really started down the quality system path. We started looking at ways to continue to support our growth, and we went down the path of automation. Right? We couldn't make enough parts, and we were buying machines virtually every year to add to our capacity.
Had that been a practice that preceded you joining, or this was something you were kind of introducing as the
automation really came with me because one of the issues I recognized and I shared with the board of directors, we had a maturing workforce, and we needed to figure out a way to make a transition where we could increase the productivity of the company without being dependent upon people that were retiring at an accelerating rate.
Okay, so one way to deal with that would be to rely more on machines than on those people, those experts, as you said.
Well, that was the early thinking. And in 2008, this was before the crisis that crippled the world in the fall of 2008.
Sure.
In the spring of 2008, we had some events where we had created unmanned production that we could run X thousand pieces over a course of a week. And without fail, we'd come in on Monday morning and we'd find 400 or 500 pieces either bad or requiring rework because, the machine, the tool broke, whatever the issue might have been. And that was pretty apparent to me that no matter what the quality system looked like or how effective the automation or the QC inspection processes were, it wasn't working. And so that was really when I started trying to figure out different paths.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity to read The Toyota Way. And there were a few things that really struck me about that because, again, we were a successful company that had a very high degree of organizational trust, high degree of camaraderie amongst the organization. I was always concerned that I didn't want to disrupt the culture. And the more I started to learn about TPS and the base philosophies of TPS, I thought this could have application for Dublin Company.
That's really interesting. I had kind of a similar experience where it was around the same time, working for Starbucks then, but also a culture, that had been even memorialized in books and articles about the company that was really good. People felt quite good about the culture, and had a similar, I guess, belief when we were exposed to TPS, to lean thinking, that it seemed consistent with the good culture that we had already, and also had some promise to help us with, some of the problems that we were facing again at that time, 2008, almost the exact same time frame.
Huh. Well, it was a case where we have conscientious employees, and we have a high degree of just what I call organizational trust. The management trusts the employees to try and do the right thing, and vice versa. The employees are counting on the management to be doing the right thing, and so I was very conscious about jeopardizing that. And we've all seen it where you chase the flavor of the month for some panacea, and I didn't want to go down that path. So I exposed my management team, which was at the time probably about 8 people, to the book, gave them 2 or 3 weeks to read it, and I said, if you don't read it, here it is on CD. Listen to it in your car on your back and forth to work.
CD. That's perfect.
Yeah. Right, out of the past. I'm starting to date myself, but anyway.
It was only 2008,
I know. That's a long time
funny.
ago in some people's mind.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But it was one of those things, again, where I needed to make sure that the team understood if we started down this path, we didn't really want to deviate from it. They came back, we had a positive conversation, and we really started to target a small group. We brought in probably 8 to 10 people, not necessarily in a job function that was tied to any activity on the shop floor. I remember we brought in one young lady out of accounting.
Okay.
And what we were really looking for were people that were willing to say, we can do it different. The thing that we didn't want to say was, oh, we've tried that before.
Sure.
And so we were looking for more open-minded than we were technically knowledgeable.
But were these 8 to 10 people connected in any way? So you've got the gal from accounting, the other 7 or 9 people.
Well, we were all based in Waukegan.
Okay.
Right, and when they came in, we kind of introduced the idea, and not everybody was from outside departments. We took people directly from machining, directly from assembly, and of course, I had the whole manufacturing organizational chain involved.
Okay.
I will come back to that. Those people probably had the hardest stretch. So there was a couple of us that I hate to say at the top that were driving this, and the people on the shop floor were very receptive.
Okay.
The change really was difficult in that connecting those two extremes.
Sort of in the middle there.
And but anyway, to boil it down, we really started in with the basic tools of lean thinking. We wanted to try and make the demand visible. We wanted to try and drive towards one-piece flow. Mind you, this is right on the tails of me buying automation to make thousands of pieces. Now I'm starting to talk about one-piece flow, and that was a challenging period for us. But the people, honestly, everyone engaged, and we used the philosophy of let's run an experiment. Because there were plenty of times people would come to me saying, we're ruining whatever we're doing, and we adopted, for whatever reason, it felt non-threatening to say, let's run an experiment. If no one's going to get hurt, the building doesn't burn down, there's virtually nothing we can't reverse in a week or two. So
that was, I'm curious, but can I interrogate that just quickly? So the that kind of phrase, let's run an experiment, or even just the concept of experimentation. So with Dublin, that concept was a part of this practice from the beginning, from 2008?
Yes, and I will tell you why. We wanted it to very much be our system, very localized. And we avoided the use of the very typical Japanese terms. Now we're much more comfortable with it today, 10 years, 11 years down the road. But at the time, it was more about making the people comfortable and introducing Genji Genbutsu or Kaizen or Picket. It just seemed to add one more complexity that we didn't need to do.
So there's the existing culture you mentioned that was good and healthy, and from your standpoint, didn't want to do anything to disrupt it. There were some issues, so that the move to automation, the fact that automation was being applied to sort of a big batch production approach, and the corresponding defects. So I'm sure there was some frustration that folks felt when they would come in Monday morning, find all these defective parts, and with the, I guess, group sort of recognizing that there were some problems to solve, with a good organizational culture, with, as you said, trust between management and frontline folks, and a desire to both learn something new but not be disruptive. That sort of concept of experimentation versus like an implementation, right? So here's this system from somewhere else, Japan, I guess in this case, and what we're not trying to do is just implement that thing, but to experiment with it, to explore how it might work here. We have problems, right? No disagreement there. And also we have a lot to be proud of. And so how do we kind of, I guess, recognize both of those things?
One of the things a couple of things. You said we had problems. We did. We had two different problems. We had growing inventory with poor service level, which was really the banner we built our communication to all of the employees around, because they could see it. They could understand that. At the board level, the conversation was we have a maturing workforce that at any given day, and up until the fall of 2008, the stock markets were rising and people were looking at retirement. So at any given day, we could have a significant brain drain organizationally for the company. So when we talked about experiment, it diffused the feeling for the supervisors to say you're doing it wrong,
right?
All the way up through the vice president of manufacturing, who had been here at that time 35 years. We didn't want to say you're doing it wrong, right? Which is, if we come in and do quote unquote best practices, that meant your practice wasn't best.
Totally, that's right.
And the other portion of it was experiments have an implication of an end date. We're going to run an experiment, so it's not permanent. We're not coming in to change your world forever. Typically, and I would say 99.9% of the time, the experiment was successful to some degree of closing our gap to target condition, and therefore whatever it was we were experimenting on was embraced, and then we moved on kind of the next phase. But a lot of the early days was really to create a non-threatening, and also we were migrating from a very directive management style. I've been with the company X number of years. I know how to do this job. Do it as I tell you. And that's not consistent with the idea of putting in a lean process and really hearing what the problems were. I'll go off on a tangent, a funny little story. We had a lean coach come in, and we stood around the new cell. So we finally, one thing we were active. So if we were introduced to an idea, by golly, we're going to implement the idea, much to our default or to our own detriment. But we stood around this brand new cell that we built, and we way overpaid for it, and it was all custom aluminum extrusions, and it was beautiful. And we stood there waiting for whatever you want to call it, the teacher, the parent, the leader, to guide us and say, good boy. And they walked in and they grabbed a part and they held it up and said, why bad part, and walked on. Well, at that point in time, I honestly thought our VP of manufacturing might come to workplace violence. But in hindsight, looking back, the message there was uncover problems. Look for problems. Don't
totally.
look for what you're doing right. Now, I will tell you, it took us years to grasp that, and I can laugh about it now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And that was, again, part of that evolution of culture and learning.
I had a really similar experience once. I think I've shared with you a little bit about my background. Some people may know, but I was introduced to lean thinking. I was a store manager for Starbucks. And, coffee shops have, in the morning, a peak period, right, where most of the customers come in, obviously on their way to work or whatever, to get started for the day with a cup of coffee. And my store, we would run with it was kind of a busy store. We would run with like 4 baristas in the morning is what we needed to handle that volume, And so the team and I had done some work. It's a little bit of a different story, but similar kind of coaching moment, I guess, which is why I'm going to share it. And the team and I had done a lot of improvement, a lot of Kaizen, figuring out how to really effectively operate during that peak period with the number of customers that were coming in and the drinks that they were ordering, so on and so forth. And we had a visitor, a lean coach, maybe the same one, who knows, who I was really proud of what improvements we had made, and that with this 4-person crew we had figured out a lot of things. And so they came and visited and observed, and it was a fairly smooth running day. Things kind of went well, and some of the changes that we had made, were I guess on display as good. And so the busy period ends. I go to this coach, looking for an attaboy, maybe similar to you guys, and all I got was, what would it look like with 3?
Exactly. That's and it's an interesting thing because that was, and I didn't understand it at the time, I'll be honest, but in reflection of it, that was where the focus was on the thinking, not on the tool. We had built the tool, the cell.
Sure.
And boy, did we learn from that. There's a reason you use duct tape and cardboard the first time.
That's right.
Because I bet we modified that. We still modify cells on a fairly regular basis. The other thing that we ran into, which, again, I apologize for getting a broccoli patch, but in the Kanban, we wanted to create this pull system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we wanted very specialized kinds of racks. And so we went out and built or bought, I won't say custom, but they were not cheap.
Yeah.
And we thought it was perfect. Well, now if you came into Dublin, you'd see every rack is on wheels because they stay in the same spot about a week, and then we decide on a better way to go after it. But that for me now in hindsight was the first time we really changed our thinking versus just execution of a machine or a tool.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember, we were buying machines because machines got the work done, right? So if you build a cell, conceptually, it's our machine to get the work done.
Sure, different kind of machine, yeah.
But the reality was, what we were really trying to build was the thinking, and we've done better at that in the recent years than we did in those early days.
So recognizing that, the tool, the machine, to use that word, is an important part, and the benefits of pull, the benefits of 1x1, the benefits of a cell are sort of known, right? I mean, just in and of themselves, there is benefit. But in addition to that, in addition to sort of the result, I guess, that you might get from implementing that tool, from using that quote-unquote machine, there's maybe an intangible benefit that can come too if we sort of build those things with flexibility. And that's the benefit, I guess, for the learning that can happen, and the continual change through experimentation, to return to that word, unless we don't set ourselves up for that, unless we get these really expensive versions of the cell or the rack or whatever, in which case that flexibility is not there. And so the intangible benefit of learning, and I guess the development that a team member might get, wouldn't be available either.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I completely agree with you. The problem I had, we Dublin had, was really getting to that transitional moment, right? Because we were making progress, and again, we weren't in a dire strait. We were a successful company, so trying to figure out the silver bullet, right? We were looking for the special solution, and it took probably from 2008, and we did a lot of training during the 2009 crisis, and that was, honestly, it was a horrible time from a business standpoint,
Sure.
but from a culture change and education standpoint, it was a perfect time for us to get a little breathing room to run more experiments, learn a little bit deeper what the real meaning was behind some of these things. But we backed away, and if you looked at kind of a series of events, whether it was the building of that first cell and the coach telling us to focus on problems, to building all of the racks, and then realizing, and we built those racks with the idea that we were going to have this 6-bin system, which was a totally arbitrary decision. But it was in order for people not to think that this was an inventory play. This was really a service performance play. And I'll tell you, it took us forever to break the idea that we had to have 6 bins. And 6 bins there was no science behind 6 bins. But all of those small things really led to, I guess, for us, the discovery that we needed to create a problem-solving methodology and a thinking, because while we were growing at and I mean growing in our lean thinking. We were growing at a relatively slow rate because we were kind of waiting for each tool to mature and progress us. And at one point, I was having some conversations, and the feedback came back to me that, and this is one of the things that we'll share in the summit, was your progress is directly tied to your ability to problem solve. The number of problems you solve and how effectively you solve those problems. And I have to tell you, if there was one moment that I walked away and said that changed us from what we refer to as DPS, Dublin Performance System, that was the day it became a performance system in my mind. It was great before, and we were doing a lot of good things, but that really transitioned us.
So performance, I guess, in this case, the performance of, I think, as you said, problem solving, both in terms of quantity and quality.
Well, yes, but it was, we moved from that's a production tool to this is a business tool, and it opened us up. As I would tell you today, and I will highlight more detail during the summit, the 2 areas where I spend the bulk of my time are problem solving and human development, because they're directly tied. And the better our employees get at the problem solving, it just kind of unleashes the real power of the tools. But I will say that, and it sounds easy, and right, and everybody's got a form to problem solve, but going from that broad vague to a specific problem is a challenge for everyone, and maybe worse for more the management team, because they like to think big, and we're learning that problems are solved one by one at a very, very small level.
Well, another thing, so I guess if I haven't mentioned it already, I can mention it now, that I had the opportunity, along with one of my colleagues here at LEI, to visit Dublin, there in Waukegan, a number of months ago. And you just sort of mentioned the idea of lean becoming, I guess, evolving to the Dublin Performance System and expanding, to use that word, I guess, into a business system for Dublin. Not just a production system, I guess there on the shop floor, and that was one of the things that I really appreciated about the time about the visit there was that, of course, we had the chance to go and to spend time at the quote-unquote Gemba, and we started there on the shop floor. That was wonderful. I got to see the flexible cells that we're referring to now. Did not see. I think we found one bad part when we were walking around, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry.
And there was a response to that, which was good to see, of course. Not a batch of bad parts, I guess I should mention.
No. Hopefully those days are behind us.
That's right. But beyond that, we visited other areas too. We got to visit areas that are responsible for product development. We didn't get to visit the sales team scattered across the globe, but we got to interact with some of the folks that are a part of the sales team. And one thing that I remember taking away from the visit was that fact that really lean thinking at Dublin has become very widespread and sort of definitive to the business system there at the company. So, how did that, I guess, transition happen? What was it about where it started?
We don't have enough time on a podcast to cover all of it because, it's one of those things that it rarely can you really say it was one event or I can point to one or two or three events. Mm-hmm. It was a slow creeping glacier of the change in our thinking. We got better at the way we looked at the business. Interesting. Management historically, and I think management just in general, tends to sweep the problems under the rug for their boss coming in the room.
Sure.
And we didn't have a good focus on problems. We focused on the positives. And we had lots of positives. That was good. But the fact of the matter is, we also had lots of problems. And as we became more of a problem-solving culture, making problems visible was not a concern, a fear of the employees, whatever. It wasn't the problem. Let's talk about what's inhibiting us from going from current condition to target condition. And all of a sudden it changes from, Ron, you're doing a bad job, right? You're the bad employee, otherwise everything would be perfect, to we have a process related problem. So those small evolutions that took place really started to lay the groundwork for this to be a human development system. Because now, as I stand with an employee and we're looking at a process problem, it's not that employee in trouble, it's that employee sharing their views of what the problem is, current condition, and maybe some countermeasures that they're contemplating. And that thinking has unleashed for us really what we were referring to as our human development process. We use it in our recruiting, we use it in all of our training, and we've spread that throughout the organization. So coming back to your comments about seeing it in various areas, once you're able to say we have problems, now all of a sudden tools that are available, whether it's A3s or simple problem worksheets, but we adopted A3s all the way from the top. We do our annual plan on an A3 that breaks down gap to target on what we consider are the 3 to 5 strategic things we want to get done in the year. And those 3 to 5 things then break down into various departmental A3s, and it flows all the way down through the whole sales organization worldwide, the engineering organization worldwide, marketing worldwide, and those A3s eventually flow into the shop floor FMDS process. So
FMDS, what does FMDS stand for?
Floor Management Development System, and that development is a
keyword,
key component to that acronym. And I will, every year, we've been doing this now The A3 top-level strategic plan, we're probably on about our 5th year of it. And every year we get incrementally better at the way we look at it. We try and make the top-level A3 thinking breakthrough-oriented. What's going to disrupt our marketplaces, our customers in the next positive way we can. And that's been a growing process for us. So it is throughout the organization. I will tell you it's at varying levels of quality and implementation.
Well, so a couple of, I guess one comment and then a question from me. So a comment, I guess, we've referenced a couple of times that you and Dublin, some other folks from Dublin will be with us at the Lean Summit in Carlsbad. And it so happens that this is not Dublin's first time presenting at a Lean Enterprise Institute conference. I think it was 2012, 2013, maybe when you presented before. And, I think a primary reason to invite Dublin to come back is this sort of evolution, this expansion of Lean applied at Dublin from, sort of more of a tools focus or a shop floor focus with a lot of the kind of TPS tools there on the shop floor, to something that now is really widespread throughout the company and has helped sort of define the company's management system and as you've described, even more expansive than that, its business system. So just to mention that's really a primary thing that we're excited to hear about at the summit is that kind of evolution, I guess.
Yeah, and by no means do I hold Dublin up as the perfect example, but we're willing to share our experience, our learning. It's been good for our organization, and if someone can take away some positives for their organization, I think it's a success. We're looking forward to it.
Well, and so then I guess within that, just to return to a point from a minute ago, and the cultural marker, I guess, characteristic at Dublin, which I think you rightly said is a pretty common one across businesses, the tendency for management often to sweep problems under the rug versus really embrace them, versus looking for bad part and the question to why bad part, as your coach demonstrated. I guess, is there an individual, maybe it's yourself, I don't know, or maybe there's someone else who really kind of symbolizes the transformation, I guess, from that tendency to an embracing, I guess, of problems that we can kind of learn from. What was it that helped them to become comfortable with that? Because that can be an uncomfortable thing, right? I mean, it can be kind of feel threatening and scary to be so transparent with the fact that in your area there are problems, when historically it's appeared that that's not the case. Of course, we know that there were problems that maybe were just being hidden, but to get comfortable with that kind of transparency is not an easy thing. So
I'm certain many of the people that will probably listen to this podcast understand the fact that successful Lean implementations really need to be not only top-down driven, they need to be organizationally embraced. So certainly I was probably the instigator of this disruption, because I was the one that came back and said we should try it. But it's really lead by example at all levels. So if my first response is who screwed up versus tell me what happened, right? Then the people that report to me start off with the word who screwed up.
Right.
And I don't think that's really productive. We have very good employees. We're fortunate in a tight labor market to have the employees that we have. And I think one of the things that we learned as we made this transition from tools to a problem-solving human development organization was we're much more powerful if we can unleash their thinking. It's much better than anything management can put down on a PowerPoint. And so, early on and even today, I will drop in on problem presentations, and I want to hear about the problems. And that's an example that I want to set for my management group. But then I look for my management group to also embrace that, and we have. It's taken a while, certainly. Those things don't happen overnight. But again, we were fortunate. The high degree of organizational trust, and really the fact that no one was going to lose their jobs in this area. Have we found cases where through standards and through our training, employees aren't as successful in one position versus another? Sure. But many times those employees embrace the opportunity to change that. If they understand the situation, they understand the metric that they're being measured against, and they acknowledge that that's something that they're not good at. A lot of our assembly is a very nimble, requiring a great deal of dexterity in the assembly process. That's not for everybody. I certainly couldn't do our assembly process. So, when we make the problem visible, Ron can't do the assembly and meet our tack time, but I have another opportunity for Ron over here. It's much less threatening. So do I want to point at one person? I think that'd be an understatement of how well the organization's embraced it to say one person led it. I mean, certainly everyone knows, and I say it clearly, I want the replacement of my job to come through our DPS organization. So but that's an expression of our commitment to that thinking.
Right. Yeah, so I guess what you're making me appreciate is we talked about the strength in organizational trust that's been a hallmark of Dublin since long before 2008 and the introduction to Lean, and that was something you were appreciating, even when you joined the company in 2002. And I think I may have described, or maybe you did, that could be recognized in the trust that exists between management and folks on the front line, the folks that are creating value. But I guess you're making me appreciate too that there must also be trust in place and I guess being reinforced also between sort of top level management, executives like yourself, and the management who's sort of more in the quote unquote middle, and that trust has been really key too, so that those folks that was a sort of a level in the organization that you acknowledged struggled maybe a bit more at the beginning, and so for there to be trust again between those kind of upper levels must have been really important too, as demonstrated and reinforced by your leadership, the fact that you don't show up and start throwing blame at people, but get focused on the process and the problems.
Yeah, and Josh, it's one of those things, again, because now we've been at it since 2008, so it's 12 years. It's hard to believe. It feels like it hasn't been that long, but I'm glad to say it is 12 now, and hopefully it'll be 25 soon. One of the things, though, is we migrated from the early days to much more of a problem-solving focus that grew into our human development focus. We're better at recruiting people today. That the leap to DPS is not as great. So, by the human development aspect, we understand what it takes to work in our environment, and it's not for everyone. But so while those middle managers of 2008, really had a hard time grasping, because what they really were the best operator or the best salesman or the best whatever.
Well, they were the expert that you talked about.
Exactly. Today, we're looking for much more of a change in the approach, collaborative, problem solving, constructive. We're still a very action-oriented company. It's in our nature. So we don't want paralysis by analysis, but we want constructive thinking. And so the people that we bring in today, their ability to integrate is better because we're better at who we bring in.
Sure.
You know,
sure. So one last thing that I want to ask about, and this was something that you had mentioned to me before we started recording. And you just sort of alluded to it. So as part of your, routine, your top management work, you just mentioned dropping in on problem-solving presentations and celebrating the fact that problem solving is happening. And you had mentioned to me before we started recording that recently you awarded the Problem Solver of the Year. Or the Problem Solve of the Year. I can't remember exactly. But,
Solver, yeah.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. That seems like an interesting practice there at Dublin.
Well, is in an effort for us to improve our problem-solving abilities. We've broken down by departments a requirement to have a problem-solving report out every week, and a group of management. It fills virtually every day of the week. There's a 1-hour departmental report out, and so a group of managers will attend, say, 3 different departments on Monday, and then 3 more departments on Tuesday, and then we kind of grade and score the problem-solving activity. And what we're really looking for is growth in thinking, not necessarily the most economical problem solving that saved X money or time or whatever. We're really looking to grow the thinking in the organization. And so it's funny because the employees built their own trophy. And so we have a problem solver of the month every month. We kind of celebrate and acknowledge, and they get the trophy for the month. And then at the end of the year, we do a little celebration. We just had it yesterday afternoon, where we call all of the employees in from both shifts, and we call the 12 problem solvers of the month up to the front, and we spend a little bit of time talking about the meaning of problem solving to the company and why it's so important, and how it's been the positive for all of the employees. And then we acknowledge the employee that's the problem solver of the year, and he gets a trophy, and we have a plaque for every year with the person's name on it. And this is, I have to be honest, this is only our 2nd year of the Problem Solver of the Year award, but
24 problem solvers of the month.
Yeah, but we're celebrating the idea of it. And of course, it's a nice way then for me to be able to walk past any department and say, geez, Josh, I was surprised you weren't the Problem Solver of the Year. Are you going to make it next year? Just to reinforce the need for that kind of thinking in our organization. It's no money, it's no extravagance, it's just acknowledgement of the people that are really doing great thinking for the company.
That's really cool to hear the emphasis on the thinking and the use of the method itself versus sort of its output, I guess, the solution, not being the point in a way. But instead the thinking and the word you've used, growth, human development, that thinking sort of signifies.
I will tell you, as the lead of the business, it's extremely rewarding to me to see the people and the work that the people are generating using these tools. It just, I think it's the right path for Dublin. And so we're very comfortable with it.
Excellent. Well, hey, thanks for today, for the conversation. Thanks again for the visit a couple of months ago, and thanks in advance for the upcoming participation in the Lean Summit. Excited to hear more. You've touched upon a couple of the themes that you'll be kind of focusing in on, and I look forward to not just hearing from you there, but also some other folks from Dublin.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's my pleasure. We're happy to share this story, and hopefully it's got some benefit to some of your listeners.
And that's a wrap. I want to thank Ron one more time for sharing with me, for sharing with us about lean thinking at the Dublin Company. I'm eager to hear more at the Lean Summit 2020. I also want to thank Emma Ripa, Tom Ehrenfeld, and Lori Moniz, who help with WLEI's content development and production in various ways, and the rest of the team at LEI for all that they do in support of the Lean community. Speaking of the Lean community, we'd love to hear from you. You can share your feedback. You can share ideas for future episodes. You can be in touch by emailing us at pod@lean.org. And in the meantime, I'll be working and learning on the job. Bye-bye for now.